I'm back out here doing another couch video. What's going on, everybody out there in YouTube land? So, finally gonna get to the second book in the Dune series, Dune Messiah. Now, when I was younger and I was reading these, this was probably my favorite book in the series. Looking back, times have changed. No, it's no longer my favorite book in the series. A couple reasons why I think it was my favorite. One was it's short compared to the other Dune books. Let's see. Yeah, we're at less than 300 pages, and the print in this is a lot larger spacing than the first Dune book, which, you know, is like well over 500 pages. But, yeah, this was my favorite, so I will be revealing the end of the book at some point, so I'll give you a warning about that, too. This is probably going to be kind of a short video. The first Dune book was about, you know, action and setting up the world and, you know, having really big universe or at least galaxy-changing events take place. This one's a lot more about conspiracy. So, it takes place after Paul overthrows Shaddam IV, and Paul becomes the emperor of the known galaxy. And the jihad that he had visions of in the first book actually comes to fruition, but all that happens in between the first book and the second book. I think this is like 14 years later. I don't remember how many years later, but it's over a decade later. We don't get to see the jihad, or we don't get to read about the jihad, but his Fremen troops go throughout the known galaxy, and they basically conquer all Shaddam IV's old empire, and Paul becomes the undisputed emperor. And he also becomes sort of like a living god figure for this new religion that the Fremen have propagated and spread to the world. Or not the world, but, you know, the known galaxy. So, really interesting themes, though. It feels a lot more claustrophobic to me than the first one. So, again, it's mainly about this conspiracy. So some of the major political players in the Dune universe get together to have a conspiracy to overthrow Paul. And one of the things that they use is this Duncan Idaho Gola. So Duncan Idaho was a character in the first Dune book, and he's a major minor character is how I would term it. You know, he's not that important of a character. He's one of Duke Leto's sort of three musketeers is how I would call them. There's sort of three guys who help and are really, really important in Duke Leto's regime. And Duncan Idaho is, you know, probably the least important, or the one who gets the least amount of time in the book. But he ends up dying in the first one. These they're not aliens, they're humans, but they're really kind of weird sect of humanity, manage to bring him back to life, and they create what's called a Gola. So they take his dead body and they sort of regenerate it, and it becomes like a new version of him, almost like a clone of him is basically how you think about it. And you're going to see this Duncan Idaho Gola appear in different forms throughout the rest of the books, basically. And you know, in the fourth book, it talks about how many Duncan Idaho Golas there have been. But he becomes a very important character in this. And I thought that was cool. It was a good callback to the first book, bringing up a good character who didn't get enough, we'll say, page time in the first one. And at the time when I first read this the first time around, I thought that was super cool, you know. And I guess Herbert thought it was cool because you see it throughout all the subsequent books. So he plays a major role in this. The other thing that really stood out to me that I remembered from reading this in high school that I didn't really, ever forget was, and this is spoilers, at one point there's like a nuclear blast and Paul loses his eyeballs. They like melt out of his head. I can't remember really the details, but they sort of like melt out of his head as a result of being too close to the blast, but he can still see. And the Fremen have a long-held tradition that if a man becomes blind or someone is born blind or whatever, they're sent out into the desert to die because they're no use to the Fremen, and, you know, they just didn't have enough resources back in the day, so they would just send them out to the desert to die. So it's really like jarring and important to them that Paul loses his eyes, but then Paul can still see, you know, because he's got prescience. So it was just really cool. It was a cool twist on something that would be considered like, yeah, maybe we could say taboo in their world. So just overall, and it works on multiple levels, and it plays a role in the end. So here's my spoilers coming up for the end. In the end, Paul ends up walking out into the desert, and I didn't realize this till I listened to it on. I got the MP3s, like I got the book on tape, and so I re-listened to it again a few weeks ago. I didn't realize that really works on two levels. And then when I read the Wikipedia page, somebody else, I guess, thought the same thing, because Paul fulfills his obligation as a Fremen. So Paul walks out into the desert. He's basically a blind man. In practice, he's not really blind, but he's basically a blind man. He doesn't have eyes, and he walks out into the desert to die. And he fulfills the Fremen tradition. So he solidifies his place in history for upholding the Fremen beliefs and traditions, and sort of helping propagate his own religion that he's sort of inspired. And it helps for when his children come along, because at the time, Chani, the woman he married in the first book, or it didn't marry, it's his consort. He's actually married to Shaddam the Fourth's daughter, which also plays a big role in this book. But his consort, who he's having children with, is about to give birth to the two characters who will be, the two main players in Children of Dune, and at least one of them will play a huge role in God Emperor of Dune, because he is the God Emperor. And so, Paul walking out in the desert fulfills that Fremen obligation and helps solidify his children's future as rulers of his empire. Again, real short read, but it has some great themes, and I think one of the reasons I liked it better than I did even the first one when I read through it the first time when I was in high school is it was much shorter. It was much easier to sort of grasp. I mean, Dune was so long that it took me like 3 readings to get through Dune. First of all, like 2 false starts, and then getting through it just took kind of forever. So this was much more compartmentalized. I remember reading most of this almost in a day. So also great quotes in here too. Looking back, probably not the best Dune book, but it certainly moved the saga forward, and it set a huge tonal shift in the saga in terms of it was a lot more about like court intrigue and how that world that Herbert built in the first one actually functions now, especially now that Paul is the Emperor of the known galaxy. I love this book. I really recommend this to anybody. We're coming up on Children of Dune's the next one in the series. I'm listening to the book on tape of that again. I think Children of Dune is going to move down my list to like least favorite of the Dune books. Really, the 4th one stands in my least favorite of the Dune books, but number 2, definitely read. Definitely a good follow-up to the first one, but just not the same at all. And I like that he went in a different direction. I felt like the story of Dune was a complete story, so he had to go somewhere else to hold our interest and to expand the universe. Like, comment, and subscribe. I hope you enjoy this. Not a lot of people have been watching my Dune videos, but I love Dune. It does not get enough play in pop culture. I want to sort of I'm an evangelical when it comes to Dune, so definitely check out the series, and I'll keep putting out more videos.